First of all, would like to thank everyone for coming this morning. It's wonderful to see so many people have made the effort to be here, both women and men here this morning for this conversation. And this is the first in a series of conversations that we will be having around allyship and how can men support women in business and promoting equitable pay promotion within the working environment. And that being said, I think we should probably address the elephant in the room. There was a comment on LinkedIn that said, why are we having 4 men having a discussion about women issues? And I think that was an interesting take on this panel. And so, you know, it's often said that bias against women, in order to address bias against women, we need to have conversations like this. Topics about equal pay, equitable hiring, promotion, where men, senior leaders like ourselves, need to use our positions of power to influence, to help bring knowledge and resources to support women. That being said, gentlemen, what does allyship mean to you?
Yeah, first, I want to address the comments made by those very kind people on LinkedIn who called me a powerful man. I'm not a powerful man. I'm a man who works in a powerful organization. That's very different. And I think ultimately driving change kind of takes a top-down meets bottom-up type of approach. You need vision at the top of the firm, but you also need allies within the firm to support and to drive that change. I will talk a little bit in more detail about the sort of best practices and the kind of controls, the frameworks you can put in place within a corporation to ensure that change is happening. But unless you have the support from the bottom up of the organization, that change is actually going to take a lot longer to happen. And quite unfortunately, the industry that we've all inherited is still male-dominated today. And that is why you actually need male allies in corporations to drive change. Women are allies by definition, right? Because they're kind of fighting for the cause. But you also need men to kind of rally to that cause and support the change, simply because there's more of them than women in leadership positions.
Bill?
Yeah, I mean, I want to address that unfortunate comment because you know, this is something I've been banging on for years at 30% Club, is that we don't need more women involved to try to make change for women. We need more men involved, okay? And what we really need is, I guess I'd call it almost reverse inclusion, because no one needs to convince the women in this room or other hardworking, talented women that they should be in positions of power. They know that, okay? You need to convince the men who sometimes, not even through malice, but maybe just don't think about it, whether because of their cultural background, how they've grown up in business. They've been surrounded by men the whole time who are in positions of power. And so when they think about positions of leadership, it just doesn't even occur to them to think of hiring a woman. And so those are the people we need to reach out to. And so it's really unfortunate to hear, oh, you know, why are men talking about this? Men should be talking about this. And when I think about, you know, sort of, again, this idea of reverse inclusion, it takes reaching out, because it's, you know, it's a scary, sensitive topic, especially for men, because men don't want to be pointed at and say, oh, you know, goodness, you're sexist and your organization is horrible because you don't have enough women, et cetera. You know, there aren't, well, there are a lot of potential minefields if you know, say the wrong thing or are perceived as seeing the wrong thing. And so it really takes reaching out to men, getting them involved, and being patient and open-minded. Because, you know, for the most part, if a man sits up here and talks about this or comes to an event like this, they probably want to make change, right? They have good intentions. And so the wrong thing to do is if they do say something that really is not appropriate, or if it's perceived as not appropriate. The worst thing you can do is point at them and say, oh my God, what a horrible person you are, et cetera. That's not the right approach. It really takes patience and understanding and inclusion, and that's the way we're going to change mindsets. So, I remember when I first joined the 30% Club, it's gotten better. But I would attend events where sometimes there would be 100 people, maybe even 200 people, and I could count on one hand the number of men in the room. And that's unfortunate. So in order to make change, we need to get men involved too. And we need to, those are the mindsets we need to change more than any. And in fact, the more backwards the mindsets, the more they have cultural bias, those are the people we really need to work with and talk to try to get them to change their perceptions.
Joe?
I guess I can only speak from my personal perspective. I don't have a formal position, maybe like my two friends up here. I'm fortunate in that my daughter is a professional, my wife's professional, my mom was a single mother who ran 2 businesses, and my grandmother had her own business. So I've been lucky to grow up in an environment where women just ran businesses and were very strong role models for me. That said, one thing I've learned over, certainly in the most recent years, that I think it's not just for gender inequality, but I'd say racial and LGBTQ inequality, that the suffering's real. And as a white male, I don't have, it's not for me to try and understand or explain away or have a perspective. That their perspective, the person who's suffering, is the only perspective that matters, and it's up to me to recognize that and not try and suggest it's anything other than how they feel. My feelings don't matter at all in this conversation. And then taking that away and hopefully helping my male colleagues or people who don't recognize the suffering and and having conversations about it, and whether it's just an offhand comment that needs to be addressed as opposed to maybe I would have previously ignored, or taking more decisive action in a leadership role that I might have, and making sure that these things are codified into our behavior and into our organizations, so they have to be systematically addressed.
Very good. Now, often in this type of conversation, we hear that we need to have a level playing field. But what does this mean?
I think there's a number of things that need to be put in place to have a level playing field. One is regulation or law, and we've seen that here in the UAE. Last year, the Securities and Commodities Authority basically sort of enacted a new regulation whereby all listed companies in the UAE need to have at least one female director on their board by the year 2025 or face delisting. That's a pretty strong message to listed companies. Do I believe it's enough? No, but it's a great start. It's also not enough. When you think about the corporate environment itself, there's a number of things that you can put in place to, I guess, to drive change. And maybe I can give one example here, which I think is probably one of the most concrete examples of how to drive change without necessarily having quotas, because I don't personally believe quotas is the right answer. I think targets is the right answer. And then how do you achieve these targets? You basically put best practices in place. In fact, at 30% Club, we've designed a best practices tool with McKinsey that we're actually delivering to our member firms so that they can then sort of implement those kind of controls and hopefully drive change from within. At State Street, one thing that we've done, one of many things that we've done, is to look at sort of hiring practices. So I'll just give you one precise example. At the moment, I'm recruiting a sales position in my team. So we basically advertise the role. First of all, the way that we write the job description is screened. It's screened for sort of gender-biased words. So we actually use software to make sure that whatever we write into job ads is gender neutral. That's number one. Number two, whether we work with a headhunter, whether we source the role directly, we basically assemble a slate of candidates based on a long list of applicants that we receive. Now, if the slate that I assemble as the hiring manager is not diverse, there's not going to be any interviews. Secondly, the people in the slate will be going in front of a panel. So they'll be interviewed by a panel of 3, maybe 4 people. If that panel is not diverse, there's no interviews. From that point on, once the candidates have gone through that process, once we've ensured that both the slate and the panel is diverse, the best candidate wins. Whether that's a woman or a man is really not relevant anymore, because we've actually made sure that we had diversity and inclusion embedded in the hiring process. But the final decision is really down to skills and fit and all these different criteria. You would not believe how powerful these kind of controls are in terms of certainly, I would say, opening the eyes of hiring managers to maybe a pool of talent that they did not see before. And a lot of people around me were telling me, you'll never manage to hire women in asset management in the UAE or in this region. They just don't exist. I proved them wrong. So it is possible. It takes more effort. I agree. It shouldn't, but it does. But it is possible. And we've reached a point where I'm not going to say that we have exactly 50% diversity. It's kind of ebbed and flowed. But we certainly have more than a third of our workforce that are women today in the region.
So control and processes to help have a level playing field.
At the end of the day, what is going to level the playing field is the thing that really always makes change in this world, and that's money. And it's going to come from, and we're seeing some very positive change in this regard. And I know, Emmanuel and State Street, they are driving this, as well as lots of other big institutional investors. A focus on ESG. Money talks, and when money talks, people listen. And I think, it's not only investors saying, well, we're not going to invest in your organization unless you have, diversity practices and a diverse workforce. That applies across the board, but it also comes down even to individual investors. They're demanding that today, and that's what's really going to drive change. Is the people who, the real people who have the power, the people who have the money.
In the technology space, in construction and real estate, there are, we made a conscious effort to hire more women, and it's been frustrating because we haven't been very successful, primarily because the pool of candidates has not been very large. So what we've decided to do is go further afield, and we're going to have to change how we can't just wait for women to come and apply for positions, and then give them an equal opportunity, or a better than equal, if you want to, if I can say it that way. So we have to do more to go further afield and find. I mean, Dubai is a unique place. We all know that. So how you recruit and retain people is very different than we would in our home countries. So I think from that perspective, we have work to do, at least in the organizations I'm involved in. From an educational perspective, on one of the boards, it used to be a bunch of old white guys who ran the board, and we said early on we need more racial equality, we need more gender equality, and we said we're not going to look at anybody who's not a woman. And we had some really hard arguments over that about we need the best person for the job, this, that, but you just can't underestimate the value of gender diversity or racial diversity on the board. I will say not all diversity is created equal, and I think you still have to look for diversity of opinion within diversity, because we've found sometimes that you need to argue about things, and that diversity has to come from a mindset and not just from the color of your skin or from your gender or from something else. So, but from a school perspective, we've worked hard to try and create internships specifically for young women, programs that maybe we hadn't thought about, and we just kind of followed a standard American curriculum for these things, but which may have worked in the U.S. or other places, but in Dubai, again, because of its unique nature, we had to think about some very specific ways to get young women opportunities they wouldn't have normally had.
Now, you just mentioned mentorship. How can mentorship, sponsorship, and allyship help to level the playing field?
No, that's a great question. I think one thing that Dubai is, one of the benefits of Dubai is there is no 6 degrees of separation, right? There's 1 or 2. And if we, and again, if there's any young women in your organizations that you would like someone, that would like to have some sponsorship from or mentorship outside of the traditional paths, I'd be happy. I'm sure my friends here would as well. And I say this, it's important because networking's everything here. And it's only through having a wider range of contacts to the, because again, the opportunities can often be limited here, that you can open up. You don't just sit and wait for LinkedIn to create opportunities. It's really only through personal relationships. So I think that's the onus is on us as men here to find young women who are looking for that so that they can benefit from our networks and create those opportunities and have conversations, with them, for them, about them, with the people we know.
The evidence show that women face more barriers than men in securing mentors. And there's a case to be made that men and senior leaders should deliberately and purposely play a role in mentoring women. But we found that many senior leaders don't feel comfortable maybe mentoring women. What are your thoughts on that?
I was actually fortunate to be a mentor on the Reach platform in Dubai, which is, for those of you who haven't heard about Reach, it's an initiative that was actually co-founded by Farah Fustok, the CEO of Lazard, where the idea is to provide formalized one-year mentoring programs to female executives from the region, whereas the mentors can be men or women, but the mentees are all women. So I think I've been on that platform for 3 years now, and quite frankly, I never felt uncomfortable mentoring women. Just like Bill said, I'm happy and have mentored men and women in my career, and I've learned a lot. To be honest, I've actually learned more by mentoring women than by mentoring men, because they just bring different perspectives to the job, to the industry, to career development, and sometimes considerations that I then embedded in my own process. I'll give you a very concrete example: maternity leave. We need to get better as an industry in terms of maternity leave and maternity benefits for women, and think about how to bring women back into the workforce after they have children. It's when you look at what the law says, it's not enough. It's not good enough. So we need to try and do better than what the law says. We need to try and be more competitive than that, because it is actually one of the criteria that will actually encourage women to join your firm and to stay with you. And again, these are the kind of considerations that maybe if you asked me 9 years ago when I arrived here, I didn't necessarily have that at the top of my mind, just because I had not come across that. And by mentoring women, actually, that sort of became part of the conversation. And I then sort of took it upon myself to embed that in my discussions with our HR department, and really sort of bringing a regional perspective to hiring practices, and make sure that this does not become just another Boston-centric type of decision, and that the local rules are taken into account. So actually, that was one of the things I learned through mentoring, but also it opened my eyes to sometimes how women are still treated today in the corporate environment. I mean, and I will not reveal in detail the discussions I've had in those mentoring programs, because they're all confidential. But it was an eye opener for me, and it was really, some of it was shocking. Women basically working for top tier institutions that have an office in this region, and basically being effectively bullied, basically being treated as less than because they're women or because they're not the right nationality. That is unacceptable. How do you change that? I did not even relate to that, because I don't think that exists in my company. If it does, I haven't seen it. But it was actually hard for me to comprehend how a global firm could still allow for that kind of behavior to perpetuate and to happen. And I will maybe conclude by saying that, just like you, my first mentor, who actually sort of encouraged me to pursue a career in financial services was also a woman. And 25 years on, when I have a problem, I go to her. So we're still in touch, and she's been a great advisor, a great guide throughout my entire career, a great sounding board. And so for me, it was actually never a debate or a question that, men should be mentoring women as well.
In order to help mentoring of women, I want to go back to this issue that, again, is just really, really important to me of what I will call reverse inclusion. Sometimes men may not feel comfortable mentoring women for a variety of reasons, but one of those reasons may be they might feel like they're not wanted. Sometimes, frequently, when you have events like this that are geared towards diversity in the workforce and inclusion of women, men sometimes feel like, oh, well, that's an event for women, and they don't want me there. Or they may be frightened. They may be frightened that it's going to be a session that starts vilifying men, and they don't want to be around that. And I think we just need to change that mentality. We need to change that mindset. And I think it takes brave women going out to men who haven't been involved in that and saying, why don't you come along? And then it takes brave men who are willing to come in, because these are difficult conversations. They're very sensitive conversations. I don't like the idea of maternity leave. I think it should be parental leave. Now, I had a particular experience with this because my first son was born right after I finished undergrad and before I went to law school. I decided to take a year off and take care of him, and it was a great experience. I mean, it was feel so blessed I had that experience. I wish I had had that opportunity with my other children, but I didn't. But I'm glad I had it with him. I realized, how hard it is. Definitely the hardest job I've ever had, the most fulfilling job I've ever had. But if you think about it, if you have a very generous maternity policy, let's say a woman gets 6 months, 9 months, a year. On the one hand, that's great. On the other hand, she is going to be out of the workforce and away from the opportunity to build her career for all that time. And let's face it, it's really tough to just plug right back in. We can put in all sorts of policies to try to protect against that, but just from a social perspective, from a work perspective, you can't. It's hard to just put your career on hold. If we had a policy, let's say you get 6 months of parental leave, but it has to be shared equally or you lose it. So one parent could only take 3 months, or make it a year and one parent can only take 6 months. That levels the playing field. It levels the playing field because the men hopefully will be out as much as the women. It also is a great opportunity for the man. And third, and I think most importantly, like I understood when I was watching my son, men will realize just how hard it is and how hard it is to work and have a child. And I really would like to see more countries adopt that, because I think it'd be huge in again not only changing the workforce but changing mentalities too.
How can we change the model, the mentoring model, as opposed to this stereotypical of, meet me on the golf course or meet me for drinks after work, where it may make it a bit more inclusive for women to be mentored by men, et cetera.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with the book, but What Color is Your Parachute changed my life. I didn't go through it. I didn't do all the exercises, but there's so many themes in there that I think are important around the whole person. And so the people I've mentored, it's quite often the starting point. And whatever tool you use, and maybe it's just through conversation, is not having conversations around your professional life, but having conversations around what's important to you. Where do you want to be? How do you want to, whether it be geography, spirituality, financial, family, et cetera. And I think that's the role we play as mentors, helping people get to their happy place, wherever that might be. And so I found that for many of my mentees, it was a good place to start. And it allowed us to have conversations about non-career oriented things. It often came back to that because that's often, it's how you get to where you want to work, by going through that process. But I don't know. I couldn't imagine asking a mentee to meet over drinks and have a conversation. I think that would be, it would be uncomfortable for me to do that. I mean, does it happen from time to time in a social setting? Sure, but I think, yeah, it shouldn't be, that's not something I'd be comfortable with. It needs to be in a setting they're comfortable in so that they can fully express themselves and not have some other, something else going on in the background that might color or it might, affect how they express themselves.
A few years ago, we kind of expanded the narrative beyond gender diversity to include effectively all forms of diversity, whether it's ethnic, whether it's people with disabilities, whether it's cognitive diversity, and we're also trying to apply that in how we structure our mentoring program, in the sense that, well, first of all, a lot of it is done virtually, and the reason for that is because we will typically pair up a mentor with a mentee that are from different divisions, different business lines, potentially even different countries. And so a lot of the interaction will actually be virtual in nature, so won't be happening in business clubs and golf courses. But really, I'm not going to say in a formalized kind of environment, but certainly in a way that sort of eliminates those kind of sort of biases that you described. And then personally, when I start a mentoring program with a mentee, I always start with asking what the mentee wants to get out of the program. So I don't come in with an agenda or a predetermined way that I'm going to be mentoring that person, because really I think there's so many different ways to mentor somebody. And just like you said, some individuals, men and women, are purely focused on advancing their career, getting promoted, et cetera. Other mentees are more focused on perhaps solving a problem that they're facing in their current environment, and really getting sort of a sounding board in terms of how to address that problem. To me, another function of the mentoring programs within the corporate environment is to provide visibility, because at my very modest level, I interact with senior managers that perhaps an assistant vice president in the organization would not necessarily have direct interaction with. So when I mentor somebody, actually, to give you an example, if I'm presenting to our board of directors in London or our senior management committee, there can be situations where I'm actually going to get my mentee to present on my behalf and have the exposure to the senior management committee, because it's also about making sure that person gets introduced and gets involved in projects and initiatives, not necessarily to kind of dump work on that person, but really to give that person the opportunity to be seen under a different angle by a different population. How can you eliminate your own biases if you're not aware of them? One thing that we do, which I think is great, is once you become a manager of a business unit or of a team, you start being included in these sort of leadership development programs. And the firm has now incorporated sort of specific training on eliminating biases, all kinds of biases in how you manage people, how you hire, how you promote, et cetera, et cetera. So I think raising awareness and training is extremely important as well. And then one thing I would add also on controls is when you reach sort of the higher spheres of the corporation, certainly for us, is part of the compensation of executives is actually linked to some of the inclusion and diversity objectives that they achieve. So as a matter of fact, we just received the KPIs actually this week for everybody. So I'm actually doing the objectives for my team. Everybody needs to have an inclusion and diversity objective in their KPIs for the year, whatever their level of seniority. At their own level, and I guess my job as a manager is to work with my team.
If you don't have that 25, 50, 100-year legacy that you're bringing to the table, why not set it up right from the get-go, right? But it takes the founder, the managing director to have that input to say, you know what, I can learn from the Googles and from the Apples of what they have done right and maybe what they have missed, and I'm going to set up my company from the get-go, that in my hiring practices, in how we looked at how do we get advisors in, et cetera, set it up the right way, or attempt to set it up the right way from the beginning and not just replicate what you've seen maybe your company did in corporate that might not have worked for 100 years.